Welcome to the public consultation on Island G from Jorgen Doyle, Hannah Ekin, Alex Head, and Anna Kostreva of the Wasteland Cleaning Network. This project is based on a grounding premise that global flows of money, technology, and ideas mean that political and economic trends in global north countries such as Germany and Australia, such as carbon markets, biofuel policies, and trade deals, shifts can and do have profound impacts on landscapes of global south countries, such as Indonesia. No country is an island. Even the archipelagic one and global north countries have a disproportionate effect on territories external to them. We want to think through this together with you. Through this somewhat absurd exercise of consulting with you about the future of a piece of land on the other side of the world that you have never, of course, heard of. Let the public consultation begin.
So I'm Martha Schwartz, consultant international landscape architect, and I'm representing a coalition of international environmental designers, North Jakartan residents, developers, concerned citizens, and members of the city government. And we're working together to create a closed loop urban development on the island that you just saw. So the video that you just saw was a small part of this Great Garuda seawall, which is a bold infrastructure project to save Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, from inundation by sea, because Jakarta is sinking by, in some places, 20 centimetres per year, fastest in the world. And if something isn't done very soon, it's going to be underwater by 2050. So this project was put together by the government and a consortium of companies from the Netherlands and Korea with specific technologies around water management. And the island, it's a giant seawall which would enclose Jakarta Bay, so turn it into a freshwater lagoon and a retention pond with which they would be able to manage sea level, so keep the water levels at the right level so that they don't go into the land. And what I'm going to be presenting tonight is one of the islands that make up this archipelago. You might notice that it's the shape of a bird. So this is the Garuda, which is a mythical bird which is the national symbol of Indonesia, pointing out into the ocean. And besides these islands providing the capital required to build such an expensive infrastructure project, the islands will also create or facilitate a maritime renaissance in Jakarta, because Jakarta is a coastal city that for a long time has retreated and turned its back on the coast. And with this project, we hope that it'll be once again encouraged and feel confident to look out into the bay and see it as a resource, and to bring a kind of, a new cosmopolitan future. So I'll be presenting a design for Island G, which is an urban development that will house 700,000 of Jakarta's residents, which will be a state-of-the-art integrated district. But first, I'll provide a little bit of context on the urban situation in Jakarta. Jakarta is no longer a third world city. It is the newest of the Asian tigers and the powerhouse of one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Part of the people at the wheel of this changing spirit are the young, tech-savvy, mobile, urban middle class. They're growing, they're expected to double by 2030. However, the city wasn't really built with them in mind. And at this stage, they're being forced out of the city. So many young professionals, people like us perhaps, are forced to live in satellite cities outside of Jakarta and waste about between 2 and 5 hours of their day commuting, because that housing that is both appropriate and affordable is no longer possible within the city. It's just too crowded and too expensive. This causes a lot of problems, so the commutes really impact on people's lives, and you could say that long, dirty, uncomfortable commutes are sort of archetypal of life in Jakarta. They the lack of government planning, investment and design over a long period of time have led to a situation where there's almost no green space left in the city, and air pollution levels are at a constant high because of the amount of motorbikes that people are entirely reliant on, and public transport is patchy and crowded. So we believe that, given this deadlock, that large-scale land reclamation is perhaps the only chance to build an integrated green city responding to Jakarta's needs. And we present it to you, Island G, a master-planned eco-development, free of the ghosts of poor planning past, free to experiment with cutting-edge technology, and to provide an integrated contemporary living environment for the next generation of Jakartan residents. By building the island from scratch, we were able to integrate a number of technologies not available in the existing city, such as closed-loop water systems. So the island will be self-sufficient for water because it will have these ponds, which are charcoal-bottomed, and they filter rainwater and seawater. And in doing so, means that the island, instead of sucking groundwater, which is what all of the existing city mostly relies on, it's able to use rain and seawater with sanitation and filtration systems. North Jakarta is home to a number of traditional fisher settlements who mostly rely on small-scale traditional fishing. However, with increasing loss of fish population, which has become a problem for both the ecosystem and the fishermen, they live in slum conditions, and they're not able to pull themselves out of poverty because traditional methods of fishing are no longer enough to sustain them. And so we propose that they move to purpose-built settlements on the north coast of the island. I'll be 1 minute, thank you. In which they will be able to access government-funded aquaculture programs, which will enable us to produce protein more efficiently, and we aim for the island to be protein neutral by 2030. Thank you. I might have to cut it there.
Thank you, Martha Schwartz.
We'll also have a conservation park.
And now for our second presentation, please welcome Ms. Patricia Lowe.
Thank you kindly, Gabriel.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martha. I'm Patricia Lowe. I'm an applied anthropologist concerned with damaged landscapes, new capitalist imaginaries of nature, and their often violent material manifestations across the global north and south. So I work to document and corroborate the land claims of subsistence communities fighting enclosure of their commons. In Jakarta Bay, I work alongside a coalition of traditional fisherfolk and Indonesian environmental justice groups, including the Friends of the Earth Indonesia, the People's Coalition for Fisheries Justice, and the Urban Poor Consortium. In our work, we try to be alive to the urgencies and the material kind of conditions of the present as the urban poor in Indonesia, and in Jakarta in particular, in a city that the elite have sunk, experience them. Now this is Island G, which Martha was just laying out for us. This is it being built. So artificial islands such as Island G on the Jakarta shoreline are making it very hard for Jakarta's traditional fishing population of at least 40,000 people to access their traditional fishing grounds in the bay. The artificial islands are an attack on the fisher folks' ability to exist and live livable lives, as subsistence fishing grounds are converted into high-end residential properties. Fisherfolk living near Island G have seen their daily income dive from approximately 20 euros down to 3. So fisherfolk come out of this harbour up here, and all of this shit has made it real hard. Next slide, please. Jakarta Bay's a commons for Jakarta's fisherfolk. So this is a photo taken by our esteemed colleague Doyle as she was flying into Jakarta Bay. These are the bamboo,
Fish traps.
Not exactly fish traps, what was I calling them? Bamboo pens, where fisher folk cultivate mussels and shrimp. So they come out and visit these bagangs, as they're called in Indonesian, every morning before dawn. And they know where they are, amazingly. Amongst all of this, you can see that they don't put it where there's a river going out. So this is what is at stake. This is what's being enclosed. To date, 3 of the islands, out of all of those islands that you saw, have been built. Islands known colloquially as C, D, and G. They've enclosed 600 hectares of the bay, so what was once this is now reclaimed land, and the sand used to build those islands was taken from the area directly west of Jakarta, known as Banten. So when they took that sand from Banten, that was the end of the livelihoods of the fisherfolk there as well. Their waters became incredibly turbid, and their beaches were literally taken away. There's 5 islands out here somewhere in Jakarta Bay that have disappeared as a result of sand mining. So it's not just fisherfolk who are affected. Jakarta Bay once had 3,200 hectares of mangrove forests. Now it has 320, 10% of what was there a century ago. The remaining 10% will all be wiped out by the Great Garuda seawall, of which Pulau G, Island G, is one part. Because the water will go from salt to fresh water, and the mangroves cannot tolerate that. The mangroves in turn are a habitat for all of these wonderful animals. There's 2 crocodiles left in Jakarta Bay. There's lots of these guys, known as biawaks. There's musangs, water snakes, herons, egrets, monkeys. And aside from the animals themselves, the mangroves are they're a place of biodiversity. They mitigate floods, and they're incredibly potent carbon sinks. So this is Martha's vision. Martha's vision of an eco-modernist, sustainable closed-loop development of Island G is kind of absurd, and she knows it. I know she knows it. The spectacle of this win-win solution, climate change, adaptation, and harmonious, profitable development is a comical and abominable fantasy. Martha's designs only work because she externalizes all of the environmental costs associated with them. She can claim that they're wonderfully sustainable because she doesn't pay for all of the environmental costs are externalized to the environment in Banten, for example, where the sand's been taken from to the fishing communities in Banten who can no longer fish because their area has been so stood up. So those are the people, those are the ecologies that are paying for Martha's vision. Our vision, my vision as an applied anthropologist working together with Jakarta Bay's fisherfolk and this coalition of environmental justice groups. We toyed with the idea of demanding that the sand from Pulau G, from Island G, be taken back to Banten, from where it was taken, but we decided this was just to reverse the teleology of eco-modernist landscape interventions while keeping the vision of a total management and techno-natural manicuring of Earth systems intact. Rather, our proposal is that the island should stay as an embarrassing, slowly dissipating monument to capitalist techno-managerial hubris and folly, and an experiment in the ability of more than human ecologies to repopulate and recomplexify these ruined landscape, this damaged landscape, to multiply and tangle like the roots of a mangrove.
Thank you so much. Now, I would like to introduce the one and only Mr. Jorgen Investments.
Hi, yeah, so I want to clear a few things up from the last speaker, but we'll also have a chance to speak with you in a consultation phase after our presentations. So my name is Jorgen Investments, and I have a proven track record of harmonious, profitable conservation with ocean fertilization and carbon offsetting. And I'm here today to give you the strategic advantage over your competitors by giving you the chance to become an early adopter of my crazy new development scheme. So, Jorgen Investments plans big. And we're developing a project to deliver a data center on the Island G. As many of you will know, Indonesia aims to have one of the most extensive data collection programs in the world, monitoring everything from traffic and pollution in its largest urban enclaves to volcano and other seismic activity. Indeed, the United Nations are invested heavily in data gathering technology, with projects such as the Vulnerability Analysis Monitoring Platform for Impact of Regional, or vampire. Island G, or Pulau G, will be an ideal location for a modern data analysis center that will rejuvenate the Jakarta Bay and bring additional foreign investors into other smart city technologies. But that's not all. George Investments have a strong commitment to wellness and the environment. Through coral sound enrichment, we will implement a project of cleansing, natural diversification, and underwater rewilding of the Jakarta Bay. Imagine a future where the sun's rays are harnessed to power the analysis of vast oceans of data, where little fish, drawn by coral enrichment technology in the Jakarta Bay, nibble at your feet. Imagine harmonious, profitable conservation on a scale to match the ambitions of Indonesia's most progressive development plans. Imagine the George Investments Pulau G Spa. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to speaking to you afterwards.
Thank you so much, Mr. George Investments. And now, for our last presentation, please welcome Doyle.
Thank you, thank you. Right, so my name is Doyle, and I'm working with an Indonesian artist collective in Jakarta, and as a group, we're really concerned about urban space. We're really concerned about social engagement, and we want to think about the progress of artistic ideas in Indonesia, as you can see by my slide here. We've also really been thinking a lot about Island G. And what we want to know is, what does the island think? What does the island want to do? And why hasn't anyone asked the island? Does the island want to dissolve back into the bay, a reverse spiral jetty? Or does it want to reach toward new heights as a built creation, or even unknown futures? We can't know these things. So we've decided to create a communication interface for the island, a way for it to communicate with us humans about its desires, its observations, and its emotional state. So it's an artificial island, and we think that getting it to communicate with us is really within our means today. We think we can animate the intelligence of the artificial island, and we think there are lots of people interested in hearing from the island and even talking with the island. So our plan is to set up a series of sensors, all kinds of things, satellite imagery that tracks sand movement, vegetation, water pollution, but also photographic sensors that can have wildlife and biodiversity software attached to it, earthquake sensors, air pollution sensors, even get some algorithms to scrape the internet about the news about the bay. But in reality, we have to get beyond sensors. We have to get beyond that phase and really think and speculate about the intelligence of the island. So we want to build software that can help us translate what would be perceived environmental stimulus into something more. Something that tells us about how the island has its own ideas. We want to animate the artificial island to capture data and relate it to us according to its own method, its own grammar, and its own meaning. Of course, this is up to much discussion still in our group, and it would have to be much more than algorithmic generated haikus, but we will have a lot to do. We think it will have a lot to do with how the island learns from the people it communicates with. So for us, as an artist collective, we think the trajectory of the project is a bit more clear. We know we want the island to communicate with us, and we want to record it. We want it to record its own history. To do this, we think the island should start producing texts from its perception sensors about the changes it undergoes, and eventually to also express desires. We want to find the intersection of island and human time scales, as well as the intersection of island and human social scales. So we're guessing that the island would need a minimum community of about 200 humans to grow its intelligence, and that it would be able to poetically react to its environment and trajectory about every 2 weeks. This communication could take the form of a messaging app like this one, that community respondents
would make exchanges with the island over. So additionally, we have this idea that the animated island, our AI, should run on blockchain. And hey, I know there's a lot of hype about blockchain, but it could be the right technology for two reasons. The blockchain can provide a system where cryptocurrency is in service of software, okay? So in our case, that means we can bring the crowdfunding of 200 island correspondents to support the workings of a cybernetic island. The second reason is that the exchanges should be recorded as a permanent record, an immutable history of animated island intelligence, through recording its own history as open source documents available to future cybernetic islands. Can you imagine? The inanimate moves into its own historic era, and that's something that we think is quite beautiful. So I hope you will join me and discuss the details of this project.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now, what we're gonna do is, we're gonna divide all of you into 4 groups. You discuss each of the, or you discuss one of the subjects which you want to be part of, and then we'll come back and discuss it all together.
So, here are a few questions the public had for the island. Does the island feel nourished? Does the island feel? Does it feel loved? Does it feel thirst? Does the island like us? How old does it feel? Does the island have moving pains? Was it hard to integrate? Is it worried about healthcare, and does it play games? How did it get started with haikus? Can it swim? What does the island want to teach us? Is there a correct proper noun for the island in German? Is there an ethics of the island? Do we need a dictionary to understand the island? Does the island believe in life after death? If it could, would the island yell? Could the island send images and videos? Is the animated island intelligence only a mirror of our own desires and fears? Does the island prefer to be run on rockchain instead of blockchain? Additionally, a few people thought that there was revolutionary potential to increase sensitivity to interspecies environments with this project, and for the island to survive on its own, as well as cybernetic capacity to awaken other islands.
So I had 4 people in my group, but 3 of them were late and hadn't heard of the talk. So we started off with a little recap of what was going on. I had someone ask me whether I would invest in the project, as in invest my money, and I explained that although I already have a balanced portfolio of investment properties in my home country, I have been investing my reputation in it, and I will continue to do so. Some people were interested in the role of the Dutch, and we talked a little bit about how the island is constructed and the engineering, because they wanted to know whether skyscrapers could be built securely on a sandbank structure. So I explained to them about the system of polders and the way that the sand is held in through rock walls and steel pylons. And I asked my group whether they would be interested in living in a pre-designed environment like this. They said that it was hard to imagine a project like this happening in Europe, where things move a lot slower, but that they're quite attached to environments that gradually build up, like in Nokan. And we had a little bit of a discussion about the capital moving to Kalimantan, and I explained about the kind of forces that were pushing for the capital to move somewhere, and how the island was perhaps a more logical place for the capital to move than Kalimantan.
I also fielded a few general questions contextual questions about the island and Jakarta Bay and land reclamation in Jakarta Bay. My group also asked about the nature of the Dutch involvement in the project. Was the Dutch government actively involved in facilitating the project? Or was it just Dutch companies involved? People asked where was the sand coming from that the islands were made from? How was that going? They'd heard about Singapore's history of expansion through land reclamation. They were wondering whether the Dutch would undertake this sort of project in their own country, or whether this was kind of an engineering experiment they were undertaking in a country that they'd formerly colonised. And then from there, the four of us seemed settled on a path of discussing how to disrupt or actively sabotage the possible capitalist futures the island might have. I think this process of discussing sabotage was very. We were thinking of literal physical sabotage, whereas I would have liked to have gotten to the idea of bursting the bubble of these capitalist imaginaries of particular utopian futures. There were two Germans in our group. They were quite concerned about the possibility of violence or even vandalism. They quite naively, I thought, suggested that there was still a possibility of conversation and somehow reaching a solution that involved compromise rather than resistance. And I think that was about where we got to in the 10 minutes.
So I was able to get a few moments with the public in a cozy little corner, and I was just going through some literature with the potential investors, people in the consultation, concerning some of the amazing work that's been done down there on the harbour and the architect that was involved with that. And we were just going through some carbon offsetting possible projects when someone came over who was just in town for the weekend, and he was sort of looking at sort of speculative investments to do with smart city technologies, and we really hit it off about introducing the blockchain to the project and seeing how far that could be expanded. But he had to sort of rush off because he was working the room, and I found myself speaking to someone who, I guess similar to others, hadn't actually really followed much of the initial consultation process, and so he was very, I think, he was pretty interested in how these sort of technologies and markets had come under pretty heavy criticism, and I was able to persuade him that yes, there has been a lot of talk, but that still we've demonstrated that we can get a profit out of carbon offsetting and voluntary carbon trading, and so we would like to take that forward to the next step. When he realized that might involve the blockchain, he became a little bit upset, actually, and I think it was a bit disproportionate because he was really sort of talking about the kind of environmental effects of crypto and everything. In the end, I just said, well, look, why don't you come back with me into the rest of the consultation, and I want you to channel that anger and that energy back into the consultation, and let's see if we can't turn it into something creative and get a product out of that. And he did. He came with back into the consultation. I think he had a really great time.
If you have a new proposal apart from what our partners here have said, or you have a new proposal or a new way of seeing it, it would be great that you could share it with us, and also comments, of course. So please, don't be shy.
We accept the inevitable, let the seas rise and flood the city. Thus, letting the people travel where they will, live on boats, cargo on the moon. And it all worked out perfectly fine. Because it's Hollywood.
Yeah.
Let the fishes
People will have the choice on where they can die.
That's a little bit sharp.
Maybe this is an opportunity for me. Hi, Jason Venture. I'm a partner in the venture capital firm, just in Berlin for the weekend, Party of Boys,
Yeah.
I saw some opportunity for synergy here between Mr. Developer and, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Doge. The blockchain angle. Some of my portfolio companies are developing some novel ideas in the blockchain space, so I think we should talk afterwards and maybe we can find a way to make this work. Anyway, and if anyone does how to get into Verifine, see me.
Anybody else? Please do share.
And if you don't have a new solution that you've come up with in like the past half an hour, I fully understand. It's a lot of information. So we're also taking failing suggestions. We're also taking comments, criticisms, clarification questions, etc.
Yeah, how did you all get to know each other?
We don't know each other.
Okay.
I mean, I know Martha's work. I've been in court with this one, but yeah.
We've had a lot of Twitter battles.
Oh yeah, right. Is it awkward?
It's familiar ground. We have to play the part.
Well, they're competing against each other. You must remember. So.
Well, I mean, I have certain sympathies with Martha's position, actually,
yes,
and I feel like there's been a lot of channels that Martha's opened up for us with regards to discussions with the city and with Jokowi and the whole investment pool.
Yeah, we've sort of, I guess I sort of have more of an experience in the Indonesian context, whereas George is sort of more on the global finance model. You can't really have one without the other, so we have some things to learn from each other. I really wish that I was just Doyle, to be honest. Like, that's really what I want to be doing with my life, but somehow I've found myself in this...
In the blockchain.
No, it's just making like memes. Like, don't we all want to be doing that? But somehow I found myself in this like solution-giving role.
So you're an artist, Martha, really.
I know, I am. I went to art school.
Right, okay.
Berlin.
We need creative solutions.
I totally agree with the man at the back.
Are any of you inhabitants of Jakarta?
I'm an inhabitant, but I'm still I'm a foreign inhabitant.
Question for Martha. The proposal to make the affordable housing for the new middle class in Jakarta of 700,000 inhabitants on Island G. Will Island G really fit 700,000 people?
Yeah, it's like the way that you saw it in Dojo's presentation is how it is now, but there's actually a lot more of it. It's just slightly under the water at the moment. So a lot of it is sort of at about knee level. So we just need to add one more layer of sand. It's going to be 450 hectares, which is plenty to fit 700,000 people in high-rise towers.
But won't it wash it away?
Is the sea rising?
If the sea rise is not rising, the sea is rising with the same pace everywhere. So I don't know exactly how much that is, but probably someone knows. But the thing that's happening very fast in Jakarta is that the land is sinking, and that's happening. It's different in different parts of the city, but it's happening. The fastest is like 20 centimeters per year. Is that correct?
Maybe even 25.
Maybe even 25.
Maybe sinking the same.
That's another matter, but it is really sinking. It's sinking very fast, and parts of the coast are currently like 4 meters below sea level. So, but this is more an issue of like land subsidence.
About 40% of the city is already under sea level. It's a pressing issue.
Can you tell us a bit about the relationship between the Dutch investors and the project?
Sure. I've had a bit to do with them. So the Dutch investors, I guess the Dutch are not actually investors, they are consultants, engineering consultants. So they do this all around the world. The Dutch are international.
They're making a profit.
But they're consultants rather than investors. They're not putting money into it.
Yeah.
So they are, I guess this happens, everywhere. The Dutch are kind of like the world experts in flood mitigation technology.
Great work.
Water management.
Great work.
And so they really, water management, I suppose. So and this is it's partially like they have strong relationships with Indonesia. And so they've been training almost all of the water engineers, hydro engineers in Indonesia have been trained in the Netherlands, and they have a lot of scholarships for that. But they also have been working. The Dutch government funded this master plan of this Garuda, which was produced by Dutch private water management companies. And
The Prime Minister came over and delivered it.
yeah,
So it's basically like a huge experiment?
yeah,
Yeah. And the former colonial relationship between Indonesia and the Netherlands is just a coincidence, or
I mean, that's behind us now.
it's they do this in other places, but it definitely makes the relationships are closer. Like you would
And the investment is by far the largest in Indonesia.
Yeah.
So they're working in 59 other countries as well, but photographs in Indonesia like this and every other country.
And I think that's definitely a factor. Like for example, even like art collectives from Indonesia, mostly a lot of them get their funding from the Netherlands, and there's very strong institutional ties across the countries as a result of post-colonial relationships, including.
How much of the technology that's being deployed in Indonesia is like just the same technology that the Netherlands uses versus being like brand new stuff, experimental stuff?
Well, actually, the way that the Dutch technology has changed in the Netherlands means that they do it quite differently than they would do it in Indonesia. So in the Netherlands now they kind of avoid these big seawalls, and they tend to mostly use kind of like a lot lower impact technology. I mean, of course, they still have a lot of dikes, but they don't build out into the sea, although they have built artificial islands before in the Netherlands as well, which is what they're doing kind of practically mostly what they're doing here.
From shore.
Yeah, they build out from the shore, but they have built one island in the Netherlands as well for an airport. But also, like, the situation is pretty different. So I suppose, like, Jakarta the problem is of a much wider scale than kind of anything in the Netherlands in some way.
More severe,
more severe, and also the climate and environment is really different. So Jakarta is like it's a marsh.
That's much more people live in Jakarta than in the Netherlands altogether.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to it's I would say it's like a pretty different thing. I don't think they've built anything like this anywhere before.
It's a completely different opportunity, I would say.
Where do your investors come from, George?
My investors are a mixed pool, and a lot of them have been fascinated by the way in which we've managed to work with Ben & Jerry's, for example, on a crypto to save a forest in Peru. And as I was explaining to some of the people who took a pretty keen interest in the project, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a pyramid format, or?
Essentially, what we've been doing is we've inherited a forest in the north of Indonesia, and we've been using that to sell carbon credits. And that's what's allowed us to put forward the capital to develop the early stages of the Pulau G project.
Alright. So it's similar to Warstein and drinking beer and saving a square meter of rainforest.
Exactly the same.
Warstein is a great project. Yeah, I worked with a couple of guys in the consultation phase on the Warstein project. But actually, we want to go much further than that and actually sort of get, as it were, your drinking to allow the liquidity of the project to advance.
George, where's your business registered? The Bahamas?
So I would just like to ask. This is a really good question. I'll come back to it. I just wanted to ask Doyle, were you working with the haiku in your project? That seemed really interesting. Just ahead of our ongoing collaboration, which I think is a great idea with the blockchain. Were they haikus that your project was generating? I think this is a great project.
Well, these are prototypes. So far, we haven't installed the sensor, so we're really looking for the right way to understand the bay and understand the island. And we think haikus could be a good way to start, but we're hoping that through interactions that they'll evolve into more complex and also direct understandings of the emotions and psychology of the island.
It's so great. It's so great what you can do with artists. Any other questions? Or?
What is your badge? Like your badge holder?
Oh, this is from a conference I was doing last week in Singapore. Yeah, I just forgot to take it off.
Do you take it off? Do you take it off overnight? Or?
Sometimes I sleep.
Yeah.
The vampire thing. Yeah, it's been a great turnout today. I think there's been a lot of really interesting ideas kicking around. Yeah.
We've had some, just speaking of ideas, we had some great ideas about the possibility of the cybernetic island possibly moving into other islands.
Okay.
Might be helpful for your homeland.
Like a virus.
England to take on a cybernetic quality and communicate with its inhabitants.
That's true. I do still hold a British passport. Yes. Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing is, I don't see any problem with the system as it's been running for the last 500 years, capitalism. And so I think expansion, and there's clearly a lot of opportunity in the bay, but why not let this Garuda bird take flight and become a much bigger project. And that's where I think creatives and concerned environmentalists and real estate investors such as Martha, we can really make this happen.
I'm not a real estate investor. I don't know if I would call what's happening in the Jakarta Bay capitalist.
I mean, I just thought
it's modernist, but capitalist is a different matter.
Okay, well,
The only concept of growth is cancer.
Cancerist.
What about the gentrification process in the island?
I don't know if you can
Can you
gentrify.
comment on that?
I don't think you can gentrify something that didn't exist before.
But it will.
But
And the
I mean,
animals
it's.
are gonna need it.
Is it gentrification if no one lived there beforehand?
I mean, isn't it privatized land now? Wasn't it like shared land? Like the sea was belonging to anyone, like to all the fishermen. Now it's privatized, and you can't like access it anymore, like a fishing ground or like a harvesting ground.
I mean, the island's only 450 hectares. There's still like a lot of bay.
I would concur.
How much bay was really affected by the island? I think this is something you're not taking into account, right? But again,
Unfortunately, while it was being constructed, there was some kind of blocking of some of the people's paths. But once it gets built, we kind of want to integrate them somehow into the project so that they will not lose out, because the situation as it stands at present is also not really good either. And so it's sort of like this quote that I had in my slide, that you can't. There's not really anywhere there's no room to move backwards. So there's sort of, you have to do something. And I guess really what my motivation in creating projects like this is an acknowledgement that what we have now is actually not okay. And this is where I'm different to George, is I think that we have a big problem, and like the way that fishermen are living and their livelihoods in the bay are really threatened, and they're not going to get better whether or not there's islands built in the bay. As it stands, it's not working. So we're trying to come up with solutions.
I have a question for the protest person. What's the relationship between the fisher people and then the population of Jakarta? Like, is there any form of solidarity beyond kind of like greenwashing urban planning?
I think there was a lot of solidarity. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of lifestyle, the fisher people in the north are living in a very different way to the middle classes, and there's a real geographical disparity with the middle and the upper classes living a long way away from the coast, a long way south. But in terms of the impacts of Martha's project and this broader Great Garuda project, I think there was a lot of people who could appreciate the impact that was going to have, not just on fisher people but on the ecology of the bay. And there were a lot of people who mobilised together, and of course the majority of Jakarta's population is poor. So the fisher people were, as part of the urban poor, which is very organised in Jakarta Bay, I'd say, and there's this, one of our coalition partners is the Urban Poor Consortium, who are primarily based in these kampungs, these sort of informal neighbourhoods in the north. That is kind of their stronghold and where they organise from. So there's a lot of overlap between the Urban Poor Consortium, the majority of the members of which are not fishermen or fish people, but with fisher people. And they were able to mobilise on a big scale and were able to affect the outcome of the last gubernatorial election 2 years ago. So the Pulau G, Island G, is in the state that you see it in now because the governor who favoured the project was voted out. Because the the candidate who opposed the project formed what do you call it, a political contract with the Urban Poor Consortium and with communities in the north, which was very detailed and listed in great detail. Exactly what they wanted of the governor should he be elected, and that they would convince their communities to vote in favour of this governor if he promised to fulfil these conditions.
And Doyle, do you have a haiku for that?
I've been working with our algorithms on many of these topics. So you've only seen a tiny selection of what we've prototyped so far.
So I was going to say, before we Brexit into our own personal bubbles, I think we should have like a real the illusion of choosing democratic process of selecting or voting for one of these projects. I think it will be a good idea if we would, by simple raising our hands for each project and believing actually that we're choosing, we can make a better way. So we suggest first
To compare apples with oranges?
yes.
Can you vote more than once?
Yeah, but only twice.
Only twice.
Yeah,
Okay,
not
that
four
seems
times.
fair.
Should have very short closing statements.
Yes, that would be actually like
Including how many species would be exterminated for each hectare of land or island created.
that's just poetics.
Well, I think it's quite clear that Island G
You're gonna win.
proposes a pretty unique investment opportunity, and there are so many different ways we can approach this. I can't see really how this attempt to stand in the face of progress gets us anywhere. So I would really look forward to seeing your votes clock in.
How does crocodile taste, George?
Crocodile's really really tasty.
I bet you've had your share.
Martha, would you like to have a closing statement?
I would just say that I wouldn't underestimate the power of design and the needs of an urban centre such as Jakarta. Everything, all actions create harm and displacement, but I think that there are always ways to act most efficiently, and I think we can work together to move away from that through technology.
And polish a giant turd.
Security.
Okay, so
go ahead.
thank you. So myself and the fisher folk and the environmental justice movements I'm working with, I think we're all of a strong feeling that we didn't create the island. We refuse to be sort of responsible for. We refuse to problematize the island. We refuse to be asked to give a solution for it. We didn't make it, and for us, we're working with imaginaries of sort of anti-solutionist imaginaries and blockage and resistance and interruption, and
All very beautiful words.
we're very fluid about how that happens. But I think we're blockage is our imaginary. Blockage, uprising, resistance, and we want to form a broad kind of multifaceted coalition of ways of enacting blockage, resistance, interruption.
Right, okay. Speaking
Blockage
from...
the blockchain.
Well, I hope not, no. With my artist collective in Indonesia, I think it's important to say that we think so far none of the solutions offered have been visionary enough or even empathetic enough to the situation. So our goal is really to inspire empathy and sensitivity across all life forms and species, including the future artificial intelligence.
Excellent. Well, now, shall we proceed to the voting?
Will you describe the voting for the listener as well, please?
For the listener. Yes, now what we will do is just, you're going to raise your hands for the project you think it's more viable or more realistic and in as far as their objectives. And which one is more doable, in a sense?
I just want to make one final comment, which is I'm an artist and this is land art.
I mean, if you make a final comment, I get to make a final comment too, which is that the state of Indonesia cannot handle this kind of development project on its own, and it needs external help.
With public money.
With public money, private money, PPPs, it's all on the table. So,
shall we vote? first, for Jorgen here.
Sorry. We got two votes, as I understand.
Yeah. One, two, three. Okay. For Miss Patricia.
Viva la revolution!
7.
I'm fucked, I know.
What did it say?
Sorry.
Luggage, man. Come on.
Oh. No, come on.
There's mandatory voting here.
Okay. You can get
I desist. I refuse.
Because you're crazy.
If you were doing it in Berlin.
In the spring, it's my next master plan. You just wait.
So I guess for Mr. George investment. Who was for that?
I'm fucking in George, baby.
7.
This is
I
a
think we
nightmare.
have a tie. Actually, we have a tie.
Okay, how many for George? How many for George for the listener, please?
7.
Thank you.
I thought it was 6. I'm worried there's a
Oh, you got 6?
vote
Okay,
ringing
you're lost.
going on here. I got 7. I thought George got 6. I think.
No. Recount. Okay. For Patricia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we have 5.
It was always 5.
Speculation. Market speculation.
Look, she's...
6. And for
There's my
Mr.
7.
Investments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's it.
Someone left.
Next.
One of my voters left.
You're gonna have to.
Someone hacked the voting machine.
I was
Russian hacking.
I was paid to vote twice.
Okay, so the winner is.
Winner is...
There will be
I decided.
Yeah. You haven't voted yet,
I'll
Gabriel.
vote for the capitalist.
Thank you all for being here, and you've all made the right choice.
How much did you pay, George?
Get this man out of here!
Security guard.
Hey, we talk later, right?
How many bitcoins?
As I said before the counting, the illusion of your vote counting is very important for democracy. So that's why we just did this exercise and it worked.
Please put your email on the list by the door, and we'll be in touch about the investment you're now required to make.
And we'll talk later about,
And now you can stay for a beer, and the fourth wall is officially...
Thank you.
Thank you.